Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the 7th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. Last time I spoke about the 6th paragraph, which is one of the longest paragraphs, probably the longest paragraph in the whole work. This is a relatively short paragraph, but though this is a very simple paragraph, it's very deep in meaning, as are all the paragraphs. I'll go it through it sentence by sentence. The first sentence, and probably the most important sentence in the whole paragraph, is yathārtham-āy uḷḷadu ātma-sorūpam oṇṭṛē. What that means is, what actually exists is only ātma-sorūpa. Atma-sorūpa is a compound word. Atma means oneself. Svarūpa literally means own form, but it's a term that is used to mean the nature or real nature of something. So ātma-sorūpa is the real nature of ourself, what we actually are, in other words. So Bhagavan says what actually exists is only ātma-sorūpa. And to say only, he uses, it's a very emphatic only. He says, he could have just said ātma-sorūpam. That would imply only, but to make it very explicit and unequivocal, he says oṇṭṛē. oṇṭṛū means one, it's a noun meaning one. oṇṭṛē means only. So ātma-sorūpa alone is what actually exists. Again, uḷḷadu means what exists. Whenever Bhagavan talks about uḷḷadu, it implies what actually exists. But in order to make it very explicit, he added the adverb yathārtham-āy. Yathārtham means what is actual or what is real. Yathārtham-āy becomes an adverb. So what actually exists is only ātma-sorūpa. That means anything other than ātma-sorūpa doesn't actually exist, is the implication. This is the foundational principle of Advaita. But it is a very radical principle, because it means that nothing else actually exists. Since nothing else actually exists, whatever else seems to exist, it merely seems to exist. It doesn't actually exist, is the implication. What does Bhagavan mean by ātma-sorūpa? I've explained the word, but what is ātma-sorūpa? What is our own real nature? He's indicated that in a number of other places. In fact, in many other places, but I'll just discuss a few of them. In verse 13 of uḷḷadu, Bhagavan begins by saying, the first sentence, jnānamam tāne me. That means oneself, who is jnana, alone is real. In this context, jnana means awareness in the sense of pure awareness. So jnānamam tāne means oneself alone, who is jnana, who is pure awareness. So he's indicating what we actually are is just pure awareness. And he said that alone is real. Here, whenever Bhagavan talks about real, what he means by real is what actually exists is real. Whatever doesn't actually exist but merely seems to exist is unreal. That is the sense in which Bhagavan uses the terms real and unreal. So only what actually exists is real. So what Bhagavan is saying in this first sentence of verse 13 of uḷḷadu is essentially the same as he says in this first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. But here, what he adds in verse 13 is that what we actually are is awareness. He also indicated this in the very first sentence, the very first answer he gave to Shiva Prakashan Pillai. The first question that was asked by Shiva Prakashan Pillai was, Nāṉ Ār, who am I? To which Bhagavan replied simply, ivai Nāṇ. Ivai Nāṇ means awareness alone is I. And then Shiva Prakashan Pillai asked, what is the nature of Satchidananda, oh sorry, what is the nature of Arivu, of that awareness, Arivin-sarūpam ena, to which Bhagavan replied, Satchidanandam. So the awareness that Bhagavan is talking about, when he says that our real nature is awareness, is Satchidananda. Satchidananda, Sat means what is. It again implies the same as uḷḷadu, what actually exists. Chit is awareness, but not just any awareness, the real awareness, the awareness that is, in other words, pure awareness, awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself, just mere awareness, awareness in its pure condition. And ananda means happiness. These are not three things, they are one and the same. Sat, what actually exists, is only chit, or pure awareness, and the mere existence of that awareness is happiness. So that is what we actually are. Again, in another place where Bhagavan made this very explicit is in verse 28 of Upadesha, in which he says, Tanadi uḷḷadu ena tan terihil pin. I mean, if one knows one's what the nature of oneself is, then anadi, ananta, akanda, satchidananda. Anadi means, these are three adjectives that Bhagavan gives to Satchidananda. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless or limitless, in other words, infinite. Akanda means what is unbroken, undivided. So Satchidananda is without beginning, without end, without any limit, in any, whether limit in space or in time or in any other way. It's completely unlimited. And not only does it not have external limits, it also doesn't have internal limits because it's undivided, it's unbroken, it's one indivisible whole. So that is what our real nature is. That is what Bhagavan says alone exists in this first sentence of Nāṉ Ār. When Bhagavan tells us this, are we to take this just on faith? Or Bhagavan has said, but what actually exists is only our own real nature, so we have to believe that because we don't know about these things? Or has Bhagavan given us good reason for accepting this? Wherever possible, in other words, most of Bhagavan's teachings, he not only gave the teaching, he indicated reasons why it is reasonable for us to accept these teachings. What is meant by actually existing? We can get a clue, what Bhagavan means by this, we can get a clue in a statement that he often used to make. He said, whatever exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. Why is that? Because according to Bhagavan, what actually exists must also always exist. That is perfectly reasonable, because if something is inherently existent, it cannot cease to exist. So whatever is inherently existent must always exist. So that is what actually exists. Anything that seems to exist at one time and not at another time is not inherently existent. Its existence is some property that it gains and that it loses. So it doesn't belong to it. Since it doesn't belong to it, it must have borrowed or derived its existence from something else. This is one of the fundamental principles of Bhagavan teaching. What actually exists, what is intrinsically existent, is only ourself. Everything else derives its semi-existence from ourself. And Bhagavan, this is also a principle, this is explained in many Advaita texts. It's explained in the Bhagavad Gita. It's indicated in the Bhagavad Gita in verse 16 of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, which Bhagavan translated as verse 9 of Bhagavad Gita Saram. That is a selection of 42 verses that Bhagavan selected from the Bhagavad Gita, arranged in a particular order, and translated into Tamil. In the Tamil verse, what Bhagavan says is that it is Bhagavan's translation of verse 16 of chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. Illāda danaku irupu illai. That means there is no existence of what does not exist. The implication of that is what doesn't exist never exists. Something that doesn't exist cannot sometimes exist and sometimes not exist. If it doesn't exist, it never exists, is the implication. It can never exist. And then the same thing he said the other way around. Uḷḷadu illamai embadu illai. What does exist, for what does exist, there cannot be, implying ever, there cannot ever be, ever, the word ever is not there, but it's there by implication. It's implied being, cannot ever have what is called non-existence. In other words, what doesn't exist never exists. There can never be any existence for what doesn't exist. There can never be non-existence for what does exist. In other words, what actually exists must always exist. What doesn't always exist doesn't actually exist even when it seems to exist. So whatever borrows its existence from something other than itself it is not actually existent. It's only a semi-existent. It's a borrowed property. We can think of so many things in the world. For example, if you've got some hot rice, is heat, is hotness an inherent property in rice? No, because generally rice is not hot. It's a borrowed property. Where did it borrow its property from, or the property of heat from, or derive its heat from? It derived it from boiling water. And is that water inherently existent? No, it derived its heat from a pan. And is that pan inherently hot? No, it's not intrinsically hot. It derived its heat from a fire. A fire is intrinsically hot because whenever there's fire, it's always hot. So heat is an intrinsic property of fire. It is not an intrinsic property of a pot or of water or of rice. So the hotness of the rice, it derived from the water, which derived it from the pan, which derived it from the fire. In the same way, all objects are not inherently existent. They seem to exist only when we perceive them. So they depend for their semi-existence on the one who sees them, one who perceives them. Who is it who perceives all objects? It is only the subject, that is ego. So all objects, all phenomena derive their semi-existence only from ego. And where does ego actually exist? No, it doesn't, because it appears in waking and dream, it disappears in sleep. Since it doesn't always exist, it doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist, according to the principle taught by Bhagavan. So ego doesn't actually exist. So from where does it derive its existence? It derives its existence only from ātma-sorūpa, our own real nature. Atma-sorūpa is that which is always shining in our heart as I am. Ego is that same I am mixed with adjuncts. So that mixed awareness, I am this body, that is ego. That which is aware of itself as I am this body is ego. Atma-sorūpa is always aware of itself as I am, and as nothing other than I am. It is aware of itself. I am just I am, nothing more than I am. So that is pure awareness. Ego is an impure awareness. It's an adjunct mixed awareness. So this adjunct mixed awareness called ego derives its existence from the real existence, which is I am. And having derived its existence from I am, it takes itself to be a body, or rather it projects a body in which it takes itself, and therefore it projects other things and sees all of them. So all other things derive their existence from ego, and ego derives its existence from Atma-sorūpa. What actually exists is only Atma-sorūpa. This is the conclusion Bhagavan gives us here. And he though he doesn't explain it in more detail here, on many other occasions, he gave explanations similar to the one I've just given now. That is, that only what actually exists must always exist. In fact, Bhagavan often gave the definition that Bhagavan often gave for reality, and reality means what actually exists. The definition he gave is it must be eternal. In other words, it must always exist. It must be unchanging. Why must it be unchanging? Because whatever undergoes change, but what it was before undergoing the change ceases to exist when it undergoes that change, and it becomes something else. For example, if an acorn grows into an oak tree, it has undergone a change. Once it has grown into an oak tree, it is no longer an acorn. So the acorn has lost its existence, and the oak tree has gained its existence. So since neither of them exist permanently, they don't actually exist. They are unreal. So this we can apply to all things. Everything that is changeable is unreal. Everything that comes into existence at one time and ceases to exist in another time. In other words, everything that is not eternal is unreal, and everything that undergoes change of any kind is not real. And the third definition Bhagavan gave for reality is it must be self-shining. Why must it be self-shining? Self-shining means knowing itself by its own light of awareness. Whatever doesn't know itself depends for its seeming existence upon whatever knows it. That is, all the objects of the world, they exist only in the view of ego, so they depend upon ego for their seeming existence. When ego subsides in sleep, the whole world disappears along with it. Why? Because the whole world depends for its seeming existence upon ego. When ego ceases to exist, albeit temporarily in sleep, the whole world ceases to exist. It appears again only in waking. And in dream, another world appears. So all objects, all phenomena depend for their seeming existence upon the subject, which depends for its seeming existence upon that which actually exists, which is only Atma-sorūpa. So this is the starting point of this paragraph. So since Atma-sorūpa alone is what actually exists, the inference we have to draw from this is whatever else seems to exist doesn't actually exist. This is what Bhagavan implies in the second sentence, in which he says, jaga-jīva-īśvarargaḻ, śippiyil veḷļi adil kalpanaigaḻ. That means jaga-jīva-īśvara. Jaga means world, jiva means ego, the soul. Īśvara means God. And the plural ending gal is because it's all three of them together, so it's plural. It doesn't mean that there are many gods. He's referring to one God here, but the plural is referring because it's a compound. Jaga-jīva-īśvarargaḻ is a compound that means world, soul, and God. So they are, Bhagavan says, kalpanaigaḻ. Kalpanaigaḻ is the gal is a plural ending. Kalpanai is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word kalpana that means fabrication, invention, imagination, mental creation. That's the basic meaning of kalpana in Sanskrit. In Tamil, by extension, it is anything that is a kalpana. It's an illusion or an illusory superimposition. It's not actually real. because whatever is fabricated, it's something that doesn't actually exist. It merely seems to exist. So it's an illusion or illusory superimposition. So all those meanings, fabrication, imagination, mental creation, illusion or illusory superimposition, these are all implied in the term kaṟpaṉaigaḻ. So the world, soul, and God are kaṟpaṉaigaḻ in it. In it means in ātma-sorūpa. It's referring to it here, refers to ātma-sorūpa in the previous sentence. And then he gives an analogy, śippiyil veḷļi, like silver in a shell. This is obviously referring to mother of pearl. That is nacre in shells. They get a certain mineral deposit that gives them a silver-like appearance. That silver is not real silver, but it can give the appearance of silver. So what isn't actually silver seems to be silver. Likewise, the world, soul, and God, which do not actually exist, they seem to exist. And then in the third sentence, he says, ivai mūṇḍṛum, that is these three, all these three, ēka-kālattil tōṇḍṛi, ēka-kālattil maṟaigiṉḍṛaṉa, appearing simultaneously, they disappear simultaneously. In other words, they appear simultaneously and they disappear simultaneously. The word he used for simultaneously is ēka means one, kāla means time. Ēka-kāla are both ēka and kāla are both Sanskrit terms, but in Tamil, kāla, time, becomes kālam, and in its inflected forms, the final M changes into double T, and kālattil means in one time. So ēka-kālattil means in one time, in other words, simultaneously. So these three appear simultaneously and they disappear simultaneously. There are a few things to note here. Firstly, I think it's worth contrasting this with what Bhagavan said in the 5th paragraph, which just a couple of paragraphs before. Bhagavan said, Manatil tōṇḍṛum ninevugal elavatrikum nānenum ninevei mudul ninevu. That means in the of all the thoughts that appear in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Idu arinta pirahe enia ninevugal erukindrana. Only after this arises do other thoughts rise. Here, the thought called I means ego. Bhagavan often used to refer to ego as the thought called I, and other thoughts means all other things, because according to Bhagavan, all phenomena are nothing but thoughts. That is, subject and object, all the thoughts. All objects are thought, and even the subject, the one who sees all the objects or is aware of all the objects, is itself a thought called I. So Bhagavan says, only after this rises, that's only after this thought called I rises, do other thoughts arise. And then in the next sentence, he says the same thing, only after the first person. Here what he referred to in the previous two sentences as the thought called I, here he refers to as the first person. In other words, it's the ego. Only after the first person appears, do second and third persons appear. The first person is ego, which is subject. Second and third persons are all objects, all things other than the subject, all things that are perceived by the subject. So the perceiver is first person. Things perceived are second and third persons. So only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. Because without a perceiver, how can there be anything perceived? No perceived thing can exist without, except in the view of the perceiver. So again, he's stressing here, but what appears first is ego, is the first person, or the thought called I, and then only other things appear. And then in the final sentence, he says, without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. So if we compare this with what he says here in this 7th paragraph, here he says they all appear simultaneously. But in the 5th paragraph, he said the first thought called I is the first one, and only after it rises do other thoughts rise. So is there a contradiction here? Because in one place, Bhagavan seems to say ego comes first, and in the other place, he said they appear at the same time. Though superficially, it may seem to be a contradiction, it isn't actually a contradiction, because ego is the cause, and everything seen by it is an effect. Because why is that? Because the things that are perceived by it seem to exist only in its view. So their seeming existence is caused by the appearance of ego. So ego is the cause, and they are its effect. This is a case of simultaneous causation. That is, the cause and the effect both occur simultaneously. For example, if just to give a simple example of simultaneous causation, if on a billiard table you've got 2 balls, one is stationary and the other one is hit by a billiard stick, and it begins to move. When the moving ball hits the stationary ball, the hitting, the striking, is the cause, and the effect is that the stationary ball begins to move. The striking and the beginning to move of the stationary ball, they occur simultaneously. But though they occur simultaneously, logically, the striking occurs first, in the sense that it is the cause. So in terms of time sequence, it occurs simultaneously. But in terms of causal sequence, cause must always come before the effect. So when Bhagavan says here, only after the thought called I, or the first person appears, do second and third persons or other thoughts appear, what he means is, he's not saying that they do, but one happens and then the next happens in terms of time. What he's saying is, they appear simultaneously, but the cause is the first person. So it's only only after the first person rises that second and third persons can arise. It's only after the stationary ball is hit by the moving ball that it moves. Though we say only after, we're not suggesting there's a time lapse between the 2 events. They occur simultaneously, but the cause is the striking, the effect is the movement of the previously stationary ball. So it's important to understand this, that though Bhagavan, why Bhagavan says the ego appears first is not that it can arise before other things, but that it is the cause, they are the effect. This is also implied by him in verse 7 of uḷḷadu. What Bhagavan says in verse 7 of uḷḷadu, uḷḷadu arivum oṇṭṛē uditu odungum enam uḷḷadu arivu tannal olirum. That means, though the world and awareness arise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. What he refers to here as arivu, which means awareness, doesn't mean pure awareness, because pure awareness doesn't arise or subside. What is the awareness that appears and disappears or arises and subsides? It is only ego. So what he refers to here as awareness is ego, the awareness that sees the world, that perceives the world. So so we can take this arivu, this awareness, to mean it implies ego or mind. So though the world and ego rise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by ego. What do you mean by it shines by? It's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. Without ego, no world ever seems to exist. So what Bhagavan is emphasizing here is, though these occur simultaneously, the cause is the rising of ego. The appearance of ego is the cause for the appearance of everything else. And then just a finish it off in this verse 7 of uḷḷadu. Bhagavan goes on to say, uḷḷadu arivu tōṇḍṛi maravaдаku idanai tōṇḍṛi maṛaigiṇḍṛaṇa olirum mūṇḍṛum achte porul. What that means is, only that which shines without appearing or disappearing as the place or the base for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness is the substance, which is the whole. Substance here means porul. The term he uses is porul. That means substance. What actually exists. That is, just like gold is the substance of all gold ornaments, the substance of both the world and ego is only that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing. That is our own real nature, which is the whole, as Bhagavan says. So, the point I wanted to make is, in this 7th paragraph, though Bhagavan says they appear simultaneously, that is these three, world, soul, and God, he says they appear and disappear simultaneously. The cause for the appearance of these three is only soul, because it's only in the view of the soul. Soul here means ego. It's only in the view of ego that world and God seem to exist. So when Bhagavan says that God is just a fabrication or imagination, does this mean that Bhagavan is an atheist? Is he? What is Bhagavan saying here? No, he's not. What he refers to here, Ishvara, God, what he refers to as God or Ishvara, is what God actually is ātma-sorūpa, our own real nature. That is the real nature of God, and the real nature of ourself is one and the same, as he implied, for example, in verse 24 of Upadesha. Bhagavan says, "Irakum ēka-kālattil oruporale āva uṇḍṛpara upadi unuvai verundipara." What that means is, irakum ēka-kālattil, by existing nature, by their real nature, by God and soul are just one substance. Again, he uses the word porul here to mean substance. So God and soul they're one substance. Why do they seem different? He says in the next paragraph, upadi unuvai veru. That is, only adjunct awareness is different. That is, God and soul are just one thing. But because as soul, that means ego, because as ego we rise and we take a body to be ourselves, we are limited by adjuncts, this body, mind, and all these things. These are adjuncts that we take ourselves to be. Because we have limited ourselves within the extent of this body, we seem to be a small finite creature. So so therefore God seems to be something other than ourselves, even though God is actually our own real nature. So when Bhagavan says in this 7th paragraph that God is just the world, soul, and God are all just kaṛpaṉaigaḻ, they're all just fabrications or mental creations, what he means is God as something other than ourselves is just a kaṛpaṉaigaḻ. What God actually is only ourself, only our own real nature. But when we limit ourselves as ego, God seems to be something other than ourselves. That God who seems to be something other than ourselves is just a mental fabrication, because what God actually is our own real nature, which is alone is what actually exists. So very superficially, if someone reads this very superficially, then they think, oh, Bhagavan is an atheist. He thinks God is just an imagination. But what Bhagavan's teachings are far, far deeper and more subtle and nuanced than that. So we have to be very careful when reading Bhagavan's teachings to understand each teaching in the context of his teachings as a whole. Otherwise, we can easily misinterpret Okay, I mean, it'd be very easy for anyone to misinterpret this. Oh, Bhagavan who said God is just a fabrication, therefore Bhagavan says we shouldn't believe in God. That is not what Bhagavan is saying here. So what Bhagavan is talking about here is something very deep. Why? So long as we exist as ego, God seems to be something other than ourselves. So that God, the world, and that God who seems to be other than ourselves, they come into existence only when we rise as ego. So all these three appear simultaneously. But though they appear simultaneously, it is only in the view of ego that the world and God as a separate entity seem to exist. So though they appear simultaneously, the cause is ego, as Bhagavan implied in verse 7 of uḷḷadu. Though the world and that is world and the awareness, meaning ego, arise and subside simultaneously, it is only by the awareness called ego that the world shines. Then there are four more sentences, very short, terse sentences. In the next sentence, Bhagavan says, what he referred to in the first sentence as ātma-sorūpa, the real nature of ourself, he often referred to just as svarūpa. Whenever Bhagavan uses svarūpa on its own, without saying the svarūpa of what, he's referring to our own real nature. He's referring to ātma-sorūpa. So what he says in the next sentence is, sarūpa-may jagam. That means svarūpa alone is the world. Svarūpa-may Nāṉ. That means svarūpa alone is I, in which I means ego or soul. Sarūpa-may īśvarargaḻ. Svarūpa alone is God. What does he mean by when he says this? We have to be very careful not to misinterpret this. That is, when he says svarūpa alone is the world, what he means is svarūpa alone is the substance of the world. What appears as the world is only svarūpa. Just like gold alone, if you say gold alone is the ornament, you're not limiting the meaning of gold. Gold alone is this ring, if you say. You're not saying there's no gold other than this ring. You are saying that this ring is nothing but gold, is the implication. For example, if you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, it's true to say the snake is only a rope. You can also say only a rope is the snake. We have to be careful. The stress there is the only is on the rope, not on the snake. The rope isn't actually a snake. The rope is what seems to be a snake. So when Bhagavan says svarūpa alone is the world, svarūpa alone is I, meaning ego, svarūpa alone is God, what he means is svarūpa alone is that which appears as the world. Svarūpa alone is that which appears as ego. Svarūpa alone is that which appears as God. Because in the previous sentence, he said these three appear simultaneously and disappear simultaneously. If svarūpa was nothing but the world, nothing but I, or nothing but God, it would appear and disappear. But whether the world, soul, and God appear or disappear, svarūpa alone is what actually exists. So svarūpa exists independent of these three, but it is the one substance that appears as these three. So that is the sense in which Bhagavan says, svarūpa alone is the world, svarūpa alone is I, svarūpa alone is God. In other words, Bhagavan is saying there is only svarūpa, there is not all these three. Why? Because svarūpa is one. The world is made of many things. Well, ego seems to be one, but even ego is a mixture of the awareness and the adjuncts. So even ego is, though it always experiences itself as one, it's actually a compounded, a fabricated. That's why he says in the second sentence that it's a fabrication. So ego is something fabricated. It consists of that it's a compound formed of the mixture of awareness and the adjunct, which are all jada. So it's called chit jada granti. And so long as we see God, he seems to be, so long as we see ourselves as ego, God seems to be something other than ourselves. So again, we've got division. So, but Svarūpa is that which is ever undivided. So it's not that Svarūpa isn't limited as any of these things. What Bhagavan is implying, only Svarūpa exists. It's Svarūpa that appears as the world, it's Svarūpa that appears as ego, it's Svarūpa that appears as God. And then he concludes this paragraph by saying, Ellam Shiva Sarupamam. That means everything, or all, is Shiva Swarupa. Shiva Swarupa means the same as Atma-sorūpa, but Shiva is because in Tamil Nadu it is a largely Shaivite culture. Of course, there are Vaishnavites also, but Shiva Prakash Pillai came from a Shaivite background. So since he's talking to Shiva Prakash Pillai, Bhagavan uses the word Shiva to refer to Brahman, to refer to that ultimate reality. So when he says what he means by Shiva Swarupa is Brahma Swarupa, which is the same as Atma-sorūpa. So everything is Shiva Swarupa. Just like the snake is nothing but a rope, all the world, soul, and God are all nothing but Shiva Swarupa. That is the one divine Swarupa, the one divine, our real nature, which is itself Shiva, is the implication.